Good evening, everybody. This is quite intimidating standing here before so many parents, the eigene people who I feel I am accountable to. And in general, I work as a therapist. I work one-on-one, and I look people directly in the eye, and it's a two-way conversation. But here, standing, talking one way is not part of my skill set, so you'll excuse me. If anybody has any questions, please ask them, but I do ask to wait a little bit so I can get started, and we can elaborate on things, and then hopefully towards the end you can ask your questions. So, first of all, I want to acknowledge everybody here who came tonight. I think it is wonderful that you're coming. Rabbi Silman is correct. This is a serious issue. This is the challenge of our generation, and it is a challenge which I see, Baruch Hashem, which we will be able to win. I see the Bochrim are dealing with it, they're struggling with it, they're fighting with it, and not only Bochrim, but we're talking about Bochrim today. They are fighting with it, struggling with it, and the Bochrim are winning. So that's something, a hopeful thing for me to say, that the Bochrim are becoming more comfortable, that they are gaining the skills to deal with this. But what's so important is that the parents are on board. I want to talk about a couple of myths which I want to dispel before we start. This conversation we're having tonight about cell phones and the danger of cell phones is not a conversation about Bochrim. It's not a conversation about teenagers. It's a conversation about everybody. Cell phones are a problem for everybody, not just for Bochrim. We have some control, hopefully, over our Bochrim, and that's why we're going to address it as parents. But if we think that we're standing over here to eliminate or to restrict or to deal with our children's problem, this will not work. The only way we can address this is to recognize that this is a problem for all of us. We are all susceptible to the internet, we're all susceptible to media, and we're all capable, as you all know, of becoming addicted to our cell phones. It's a general problem, not just for children, it's also for adults. That's number one. Number two, as a therapist, I work, it's true as you said, with Lubavitcher Bochrim. I also work with Lubavitcher couples. I work a lot with, do couples therapy for shluchim and non-shluchim. And sadly, we look at the divorce rate and we see the divorce rate has gone from 1 or 2% to close to 15% or more in the Chabad community and in the Fruma community. And unfortunately, very often, the issues which are brought before me, whether both recognize it or not, often there is an affair involved in the relationship, and the affair is not with somebody, a living physical person, but the affair is with the cell phone. And that somebody is addicted and somebody's having an affair with a cell phone. And so I want to point out that this, like I said earlier, I work with couples, and often the problem is the cell phone there. Another myth I want to dispel is this is not a Chabad problem. I work, I would say, with about 30-40% of my clients are Chabad and also non-Chabad. I am a therapist in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The shul which I belong to is not a Chabad shul, as some of you know. I am a shliach, and I also have a Chabad minyan. But during the week, I'm in a non-Chabad shul, and I see many clients over there, yeshiva bochrim, girls, married couples. Everybody has this problem. The third myth I want to dispel is that somehow this is a Jewish problem and it's a Fruma problem. That's also not true. This issue of cell phone addiction and cell phone problems and media and technology is an international problem that involves everybody. I have clients, I was explaining before, to the young men who are ministers. I have clients who are not religious at all, and couples who are not religious at all, have no religious affiliation, and they also struggle with internet addiction and the problems with internet addiction, I would say nowadays cell phone addiction. So this is a problem for everybody. Of course, as Rabbi Silman pointed out, that as Chabad Mishpoches and Chabad Chassidim, It's an additional problem because we have a focus on Kedusha and Tahara, and we also have a focus on Chinuch al Taharas HaKodesh, and so it magnifies the problem even more. But don't think for a minute that this is a problem only with our own children. It is a problem across the board. Hope that is clear. So I want to start at the beginning with this issue. It's about relationships. Everybody is interested in a relationship. And we know one of the famous scientists, if any of you know, a man by the name of Bowlby, once did some research, and the research was to find out what are the most basic needs of human beings. And actually, what are the most basic needs of living things, including animals? And he found out that the two most basic needs for human beings are food and connection. That we need food and connection. And that a person has a drive to be connected and to want to be in a relationship just as much as they have the need for food. Our children, and we all want to be connected. We start as children, we want to have friends. We want to be loved by our parents, we want to be connected to them. And then it becomes friends, we want to be connected to our friends. Then we go away to yeshiva and we learn about a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then we want to have a relationship with our spouse. Then we want to have relationships with our kids. And then we want to have a relationship, of course, with our grandchildren. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu bless us to continue to have that relationship. But the point is that we are people who naturally want relationships. And because kids want relationships, for this specific reason alone, they are drawn to the phone. They're drawn to cell phones. And therefore, the antidote to this is also increasing our relationship with our children. What is happening is, unfortunately for many children, you are all here, which means you are parents in Crown Heights. But our children, as they get older, and it's not our fault, we have lots of children which we have to take care of. And our children often feel alone. They don't even know how to verbalize this. Our children do not even understand that they are alone and that they are lonely. I'll give you an example from myself. When I was growing up, I was 12, 13 years old, I left home, and I didn't have a really serious relationship with my parents since I left home. I didn't think I was lonely. I didn't even know I was lonely. I work with shliachs kids, shluchim's kids from around the world. I work with others. Our children can sometimes feel very lonely, and because they are lonely, they are much more susceptible to the cell phone, and they get sucked into it because they want a relationship. The reality is that they get that relationship. They get that relationship with their cell phone. Their cell phone becomes their best friend, and for obvious reasons, because the cell phone is a better friend than any person can ever be. The cell phone is always there. The cell phone always gives you exactly what you want. The cell phone is always fun and pleasurable, and it's instantaneous. And the cell phone also doesn't reject you. The cell phone is there. The other thing about the cell phone is that you don't have to act a certain way. You don't have to work very hard to develop a relationship with the cell phone. And you make a connection with the cell phone. Not only do you make a relationship with the cell phone, but even when you act with individuals on the phone, when you're using media, social media, the same thing happens. You make relationships and you present yourself the way you want to. And because you present yourself the way you want to, it is addictive. You get to be in full control of who you are and what you want to be, and it's not real. And you create a relationship with a cell phone. These relationship patterns are occurring with our children when their minds are not completely formed. Their minds do not completely form and understand the consequences of this. And unfortunately, what happens, by the time they're ready to get married, they do not know how to have a proper relationship. Now let's add into it another piece. Let's add into a piece, especially with young men and women, and that is the social connection. Cell phones, as Rabbi Silman mentioned, are ways for our children to become connected to each other, and they use it for that. For girls, it's very often they're looking for the social connection. For boys, sometimes it's the social connection, sometimes it's the distractibility, and sometimes a way to express and to find the sexual desires which are growing in them, and they don't know what to do with them. The problem with a cell phone is it takes away your choice. Cell phones are something you have in your pocket, and you lose the ability to make a proper choice. A decision with a cell phone happens instantaneously. And as I said earlier, the problem with a cell phone is it becomes your best friend, and it's always with you. Let me tell you, most of you sitting in here are probably in some way or another already addicted to your phone. I think you can acknowledge that. I know, to be honest about it, I'm addicted to my cell phone. I wish I wouldn't need my cell phone. I wish I wouldn't have it. At the end of the day, when I take my headphones off my neck, I feel like I'm taking the collar off a dog. That's how I feel. This thing has control of my life. And it used to have even more control of my life. We are all susceptible to the phone. I have used my phone inappropriately from time to time, and will be honest. I'm not ashamed anymore to say that, because I have put a filter on it, and I feel like I'm in control of that. But the reality is we as adults struggle with it too. And if we struggle with it, how much more so our children struggle with it too. But like I said earlier, another one of the myths about the cell phone is that it's not only about schmutz. The cell phone is addictive even when it's not about schmutz. Unfortunately, for bachrim, for boys, and for men, it can lead to that very easily. It starts very innocently, and it often ends there. Just to give you some statistics, when you talk to dorm counselors and when you talk to yeshivas, some of you who know who Rabbi Sternberg is, he's done some, I would say, anecdotal research. I have done my own anecdotal research, and I will tell you that more than 90% of your young men, of your children, have had access to porn on cell phones and have seen it for more than once. Now let me talk about that a little bit, because that is not just a small little thing. That will affect your children in the moment. It was actually a traumatic experience for them to be exposed to something which they cannot handle. Number two, it will affect the way they look at the opposite gender for the rest of their life, and they will not be able to take that back. That will affect the way they have a relationship with the opposite gender, because they will have sexualized the opposite gender, and they will not be able to change that. That doesn't go away. Those images do not go away from their minds. It stays forever. It is true, I have seen with many, many bachrim and with girls who have learned to manage their internet use, and they've learned to overcome the internet addiction. But nevertheless, it has affected them, and it has changed their relationships in the future. I have seen people who in the age of 16, 17, later on get married, struggle because of what the phone has done to the way they look at their relationships. That's number one. That's simply about how the images which they see on the phone change the way they look at the other gender. But there's another issue which is not strictly about porn, but it's about socialization. The phone becomes such a close friend to our children that it stops them from developing proper relationships. And because it stops them from developing proper relationships, even though they want to give up this relationship when they go into marriage, later on, they're not capable of forming proper relationships. And even if they are capable of forming proper relationships, the cell phone gets in the way. I can talk about it a little bit more in detail, but when somebody has a cell phone and they engage in it, and it excites them, and it brings out in them a most strong emotion, They actually form a marital bond with their phone. They become married to their phone. And they literally have to go through a process of divorce to be able to have a healthy marriage with somebody else. This is the process of addiction to a cell phone. This applies both to men and both to women. They become addicted to the phone. There's something called oxytocin. Anybody familiar with what oxytocin is? Oxytocin is known as the cuddle drug. It is a drug which is released when a person becomes excited. It is released in women when they nurse their children. It's released in men and women when they're involved in intimate relationships. And it is released by people when they look at things on their cell phone. And what ends up happening is that causes a bond. The way oxytocin works is it does two opposite things. Oxytocin is the drug which is released when you nurse your child, which creates a bond between you and your child, number one. And number two, it creates a wall around you and your child that you will defend that child with your life. And that's why women who nurse have a much stronger bond with their children, because they're releasing oxytocin every time they nurse. Husband and wives and animals, when they are intimate with each other, they release this drug oxytocin and they bond with one another. And that bond is very strong while it's in your bloodstream, and once it comes out of your bloodstream, it's not as active, but it's still there. Our children are releasing oxytocin, and they are creating a bond with a cell phone. This cell phone is so bad that you notice the same experience when you take the phone away from them as if they are going through a divorce. You notice exactly the same thing. Not only that, but even when you don't take away the cell phone, you start to notice this kind of response. We know from science the power of oxytocin. When scientists give two mice oxytocin, the two mice bond together. And for the next few hours, if the scientist will put his hand into the cage, the mice will bite at his hand because they don't want him to get in the way. After a couple of hours, as the oxytocin wears off, the guy can put his hand into the cage and the mice will do nothing to him. Why? Because the oxytocin is worn off. Try and take your cell phone away from your child and watch what happens. You will notice that he or she will act exactly the same way. They will become irritable, they will become defensive, they will push you away, because it is a physiological response. They have become bonded to that cell phone physiologically. And not only that, they've become bonded to it at an age when they don't understand its full power. And this is what we're trying to stop our children. Just want to let you know that I work in a place called Buffalo, not Buffalo, New York, but Buffalo, Minnesota. And I have there a clinic, and I work with non-Jewish clients all together. In one of the high schools in Buffalo, Minnesota, it's not a Jewish school, it's not a religious school, and it's a mixed school, boys and girls together. That's how it is in high school. They have decided that cell phones are addictive, and they're just as bad as alcohol and cigarettes, and they will not let them in the school. They have set up electronic, what do they call them? You have to go through the airport. They create those, you have to walk through these metal detectors. The kids have to walk through the metal detectors, and they have to give up the cell phones in the morning, and they get them back in the evening. So, again, just to make that point, please do not think that this is just a religious issue. This is now becoming more and more evident. Some of you are aware that one of the scientists, or say one of the engineers who worked for Google or worked for Facebook, I don't remember which one it was, there was an article about this in Zman magazine. I'm sure some of you have seen that article. And it's also in the professional literature, that the person who developed for Facebook that little like button, and also other methods on the cell phone, who paid very well to do that, and he will not let his children use a cell phone. And the reason why he writes articles, he's got a blog all about it, and he talks about the addictive quality of the cell phone. And the addictive quality of the applications. Engineers are paid money, lots and lots of money, to make these applications addictive. To think that your children are able to resist these applications is naivety. It is not possible. We cannot resist this, and our children cannot resist it. And especially when your child has a cell phone at 12 o'clock at night, when he or she is tired, and she's at her weakest or his weakest, and they have a cell phone available for them when they're not thinking clearly, and they definitely do not have the ability for self-control, not because of their age and not because of the time. It's at times like that, do we want to have our children to have a cell phone? And as Rabbi Silman mentioned, it takes one time for a child to make a mistake and to be trapped in the internet. Because once a child sees those things, it's unlikely that he's going to come to his parents and tell them what he saw. It's unlikely that she's going to tell her parents that she's having a conversation with a boy. That secret and that shame and that guilt is not going to stop them from going back to the cell phone. That shame and guilt is going to be exactly what is going to drive them back to the cell phone. You see, when a child has guilt and shame and doesn't know how to deal with it, and he doesn't know how to express it, it creates anxiety. And when a child is anxious, child needs a release. And the only way for that child to get that release is to go back to that cell phone and use it to get that release. And so, the shame and guilt and the anxiety becomes the mechanism in which they become addicted to the cell phone. The shame and guilt towards what they're doing actually drives them to go back to it. I spoke to the boys about an hour and a half ago, 2 hours ago, and a young man came over to me and said, I don't know why you talk about the cell phone as being addicted. He says, I'm 15 years old, 16 years old, sweet, tzaddik of a bacher, and he said, we have a cell phone at home, and we have a computer at home, and I go online, and I go to Eitzah Sfarim on my break, and I look up the Sfarim. He says, I get off the computer. It's not a problem at all. And he said to me, I'm not addicted to it at all. And my heart went out for this bacher, because this bacher was telling the truth. And I said to him, is there a filter on your computer? He said, yes, there's a filter on the computer. He said, but not on every computer. We have a tablet, which there's no filter on it, so I don't use it. He says, but I have no need to use it. And my heart went out for this bacher, because he's 15, 16, and he's pure, and he's a tomim, and he said everything he said is sincere. But that's the story I heard from every single bacher who's coming to my office. Every single girl who I've dealt with, who's had a problem, every single adult has told me the same thing. And then one day, at one moment, in an uncontrolled environment, they got onto the phone, they got onto the computer, and something happened. I can't tell you how many people who tell me, Dr. Shigalov, I've got a problem. I'm addicted to my cell phone, and I've been in places I don't want to be. Please help me, they say. I get on there to learn chitas, and then I end up in places I don't want to be. And I say to them that this is the way the mind works. Now, the truth is, they think they're getting onto the phone to learn chitas, but their brain knows that they're not getting on the phone to learn chitas. They're getting on the phone because the phone is a pleasurable thing. They have become bonded to it, but it's hard to acknowledge that. So we need to do something about this. The cell phones are not going away. Neither are computers going away. Our children are more savvy than us. And as Rabbi Silman mentioned, we do need to be very active in putting controls on our phones and not giving our children access. One of the things I hear so often is, look, we live in a real world, and as Rabbi Silman mentioned, everybody has cell phones and all of that. I'm not even going to address that right now in public. If you want to come to me privately after the session, I'll talk about it. The fact that everybody else has them. Everybody else has lots of things. So that doesn't make sense to me. But how do we deal with this problem? So the fact that it is going to become part of our life, and it's part of our life, is true. I have a cell phone, and fortunately, I have controls on it. I have NetSpark, and it works. NetSpark is not perfect. NetSpark only works if you want it to work. I don't know if any of you have actually known how NetSpark works. It's pretty complicated, and your children can run rings around you. They can do amazing things about this. Now, of course, we can't control our children from everything, and if they want to have access to something, they'll have access. And yes, they will if they want to, but at least we can try and protect them that it's a little bit difficult for them, and it shouldn't be something which they have instantaneous access to. I don't see any reason why a child needs to have a cell phone in their pocket or have full control of a cell phone, even if it's filtered. And I agree very much with Rabbi Silman's policy. And not only I do, but most professionals who deal with media addiction will tell you that until a child's brain is reasonably developed, there's no reason for them to have a smartphone, especially in our environments. It's just not healthy. Could they have one at home for specific amounts of time? I don't want to get in anybody's way or anything like that. That's a question you need to ask. I don't think it's a smart thing to do. These things are quite dangerous. But besides for the phone itself, it's important for you to understand that yes, every single computer, every single media item you have at home needs to be protected. And actually, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but you can have protection on your router. If you're those of you who are computer savvy know this, you can control the router, which means that anything using that router will not be able to access, will be filtered. And that's such an important thing for us to do. I want to talk about some cases. There's a young man who's 23 years old. His father is a shliach and a prominent shliach, and he came to me because he has he has a cell phone addiction. He has a cell phone. And of course he came to my office, and what he wanted was for me to show him and to teach him how to break his addiction with a cell phone. But of course he didn't want to give up his cell phone. He wanted to hold on to his cell phone. And unfortunately that's something I couldn't do for him. I could not help him with that. And with time and with explanation how this was going to affect him, he gave up his cell phone. He made a commitment to give up his cell phone. And he called me from his parents' home, and he said to me, please, please, tell my parents to put filters on the computers. And I called up his parents, and I told his parents that that the son has a problem, and that they need to put a filter on the computers. And the father said to me, I know, it's something I need to take care of. I will take care of it, don't worry. Don't worry. A year and a half later, the kid is still on the computer, begging me. He's begging me that his parents put a filter on the phone. I think one of the mashpiyim came over to me and told me that, as taught, and it's true, I see this the same thing with the boys and the girls who I speak to, that they fight desperately, like an animal in a cage, when you take the access away from them. But if they've got a problem, after 2-3 weeks, they'll thank you that you took the cell phone away from them, because this is an addiction which they can't control on their own. And for some of them, they want you to help them to get over this. Let me talk about what the cell phone does. The cell phone begins, if you want to know if your child is an addict or not, start looking at your child. Does he get or she, do they get very irritable at times and you talk to them and they have no patience for you? That's a sign that something might be going on. Are they tired a lot? Are they apathetic? Are they starting to say things like, I don't really care? Bavitcher Chosid, hat and jacket, frum, kochsich in the Rebbe's in Yonim, but they've lost their cheshik, they've lost their energy. Their energy is being sucked up by the phone. Unfortunately, they're doing things with their phone which is drawing away their energy and leaving them with no energy left. Not creative energy, and especially not spiritual energy. Yes, they still are talking about being committed to Yiddishkeit, but I've seen Bochrim who are walking around and they are shells. They are shells of their former self because of their addiction. Parents don't know it, and I am bound by confidentiality, and sometimes I can't even say anything to the parents. The parents send their kids to me and pay, and unfortunately I can't say anything because of confidentiality, but I try my best, and most of the time I succeed in helping the person, the bocher, talk to the parents and tell the parents that they've got an addiction. I work with couples the same way. I work with couples, women crying to me. My husband is in the bathroom and the door is locked and he's there for hours on end. I think he has irritable bowel syndrome. Or some other issues. My husband is in the office all the time and he's doing such and such. Or my husband never comes upstairs to bed. He's not interested in me anymore. And things like that. I have husbands who tell me the same thing. Their wives are downstairs or doing something else, or they're in bed and they're looking at their cell phone. All of them say they're not addicts. They're all addicts. And this is something which I see every day. It's very interesting that in Parshas Noach we read that after the Mabul HaKadosh Baruch says, Vayinochim Hashem, I think that's what Hashem says, Kiro ki yetzeh which means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, he says, La'osiv, Harigis Odom, I don't forget the pasuk right, I will not continue to destroy man. Why? Because the urges of man are evil from when they are young. And I saw in one of the Separim as follows, I think it was in the Separno. Separno writes, because the fact that a person has a Yetzer Hara when he's an adult is because of the habits he's picked up when he was young. And therefore, how can you blame him? This is something when he picked up when he's young. I've heard parents who said things like this to me. But he's going to be exposed to it anyway. She's going to be exposed to it anyway. Why not expose him now with a filter so that he learns how to handle it? Well, the simple answer is, why not expose it to him when he's 20 with a filter so that he'll learn how to handle it? Or 22, or 23. And yes, give him a cell phone then, if he wants one, or if she wants one, and if she needs one. But also, do it with smarts, do it with seichel. By the way, I don't know if any of you know, I'm a T-Mobile subscriber. My phone is T-Mobile. T-Mobile now offers a parental control system. Has anybody seen that? You can go online, and if you use T-Mobile, and I suggest that you look at the ad, which they show you about why you'd want to use this software. And they show a little boy and a little girl on their iPads and on their phones, and you hear the mother saying, "Come on, it's time for supper." No answer. No answer whatsoever. Time for bed. No answer. And you see the mother going to her phone. She presses one or two buttons. The phone stops, and T-Mobile has this feature which parents can control all of the children's cell phones. Not only that, they can identify which numbers, they can identify which apps, they can identify when the phone goes on, when the phone goes off. T-Mobile is not designing this for Chabad community. T-Mobile was not designing this for Oli Torah. T-Mobile is designing this because there's becoming a backlash from parents and from therapists and from mental health workers who are starting to recognize that cigarettes, cocaine, and cell phones all function on the same way, is that they are an addictive mechanism. So my suggestion is that yes, it is important for us to understand we need to We need to control the phones which our children have. And for young teenagers, until they are adults, I don't understand the reason why they need a phone. If you're concerned about them, you can get flip phones. They can use those things. When they get older, you can introduce a phone. Let me talk a little bit about filters for a moment. Filters are very good, and I believe that all adults should have filters on their phones. I have a filter on my phone. My wife has the password. I'm not ashamed to say that. It has saved my life. She has the password, and she goes online. She can control all the features. That's the way it is. I heard once from a young man who said to me, I will never go on my computer unless my wife is at home. It was nice to hear somebody be honest and say that. I live in Minneapolis. My neighbor is not a Lubavitch, a Chassid. He's a Litvak. He knocked on my door one day, and he brought me his laptop. I said to him, what's this? He said, my wife is out of town. He says, I don't want the laptop at home. This is the dialogue we need to be able to have. We need to start talking about this, not like it's an item of shame. We need to understand that cell phone, there goes somebody's phone. We need to understand, it's okay, you can pick it up. No, it's not my phone. We need to understand this is a conversation we need to have with our children. It's not a conversation we need to have to our children. What I mean by that is we need to be honest with them. We need to help them understand that the cell phone is a problem for all of us, and we're all struggling with it. They need to see from us that we respect the phone, that we're concerned about the phone, that we have limits on the phone. Because if we come home and we're using that phone all the time, what we're saying to our children is, you're kids, that's why you can't have a phone. When you come in and become an adult, that's when you get to have a phone and you can do whatever you want. We are actually saying to them that the privilege of becoming an adult is that you get to use a phone. It's the same thing with smoking, the same thing with alcohol use. This notion that when I become an adult, I'll be able to do all of those things. And that's what happens. When I was, a couple of years ago, I was telling this story to the boys also earlier. At my office, I got a call from a parent who said to me that they've got a daughter who's not doing well in high school. And the high school counselor referred me to my office. I had some past, some experience with a high school counselor, and he referred me some clients. And so he referred these parents to me. These are not Jewish parents, non-religious parents from a public high school. And I think it was 12 o'clock was the appointment, and I walk out of my office, and the father is sitting there, and the daughter is sitting there. And the father's on his cell phone, and the daughter's on her cell phone, opposite ends of the room. They're not sitting next to each other, they're sitting far apart. I say, hi. So, which one of you is the client? The father looks up, and he looks at me, and he's in the middle of something, and his voice says, just a second. Takes him a minute or two to finish what he's doing. He lifts up his head and he says to me, Dr. Shagalo, it's nice to meet you. My name is such and such. This is my daughter who I spoke to you on the phone. She's having problems in school. Things are not going well. She's not listening to the teacher. She's not listening to the parents. The kid is sitting there, the girl's sitting there on the phone, texting or Snapchat. I'm not sure what she is. She's connecting with her friends. She looks at me, looks up and looks down. She's not interested in talking to me. I start up a conversation with her. As she comes into my office, I knew right away what the problem was with this child. This child had no relationship with their parents. I asked her, do you have a good relationship with your father? With your parents? What do you think she said? Yes or no? She said, yes. I have a great relationship with my parents. I started to ask her what a good relationship with her parents meant, and she said, they don't bother me. I have a great relationship. They don't bother me. This girl didn't even know what a relationship was. She didn't even know what she was missing. And so I talked to her, I talked to the father, and basically what I saw was this is a family who has there's no inner relationship. They're not talking to each other. When people are not talking to each other, when there's no connection, there's our kids are going to be automatically attracted to the phone. The reason I'm bringing this point up is I'm trying to explain to you that we can put filters on our phones, and yes, that will help somewhat, but it won't solve the problem. What we need to do is start developing a relationship with our kids. We need to start to talk to our kids. If we want to talk to our kids about the dangers of a cell phone, we need to talk to our kids about life in general. We need to talk to our kids. If we can't have a conversation with our kids, if we don't have a conversation with our kids, there's no way we can start to have a conversation with our kids about the cell phone. Start to talk to your kids about anything. How is their day? What are they doing? I know this is not easy. I have 4 kids. That's all. I have just 4 kids. And practically all my time is given up with 4. I can't imagine, may the able to give those parents who have 12, 13 kids the strength to handle what they need to handle. But the fact of the matter is our children are starving for attention. They're starving for one-on-one connection. And they need it. And it's not quantitative, it's qualitative. Taking your kid to Mincha, taking your kid to Ma'ariv, taking your kid outside and throwing a ball with them, schmoozing, asking 1 or 2 questions to your kids, learning with them, not testing them, talking to them, having a conversation. 1 or 2 words can sometimes mean the world to your children. They are dying for affection, they are dying for a relationship, and the phone is taking the place of that relationship. We need to break that pattern in our children, and we can break that pattern in our children. When a child sees that the parents are willing to pay $200 for the first hour, $200 for the next hour, $200 for the third hour, and then $150 every hour after that, because their child has a problem, that's my fee by the way, those children suddenly realize that their parents care about them. And sometimes it's not the fact that they're getting therapy from me which makes the difference, but it's the fact that that's when the parents wake up and start to care about the child and become concerned about the child, and the child starts to realize, my parents do care about me, they're just too busy, unfortunately. And when push comes to shove and there's a crisis, my parents are there for me. So, I'm actually undermining my own business here because I'm telling you, talking to you about this. But please, what we really need to do is, if we want to look at the problem, is we need to have a personal relationship with our children so that our children even know what it means that they are cared for. The fact that we go out every single day and make a living and work from 7 in the morning till 12 at night, our children do not automatically translate that we care for them. Somehow or other, they sometimes interpret that as, my parents have to make a living, but they don't really care about me. They don't really know about me, and nobody knows me personally. And so they look for that connection with the cell phone. So this is the first place to start building this relationship, so that our children do not use the cell phone as a substitute for a proper, healthy relationship. Create boundaries with your children. When they come home, if you've got computers, set up those computers in a way that they can use them for a certain amount of time. That's up to you. Speak to your mashpiyim, ask professionals about that, and give them time frames how long they can be on the computer. Even if your child does have a cell phone, there's nothing wrong when it comes to 8, 9 o'clock at night. You have to give that cell phone in. You're paying the bill, they're not paying the bill. And if your child is paying the bill, then it's going to be a little bit harder of a conversation. But this is the problem. Let the children see that this is not just their being restricted, but everybody together in the house is working on this problem so that not everybody is restricted. We cannot solve this problem just by putting filters on the phone, but we have to put filters on the phone. And the reason why we have to put filters on the phone is because our children, without intention, will get sucked into that phone in seconds. They will get caught into that phone, and they will get addicted in seconds. I want to talk to you about different situations which I've been in. One bacher who was 17 years old told me, and it's a bit sad. Why am I telling you this story? Just to give you an idea. One bacher told me that didn't know anything about cell phones, but he was at a Fabrengen, and Mashpia was talking about cell phones. So he went home, about computers. He went home, in unrestricted access. He wanted to see what was so bad about the computer, and he found what was so bad about the computer, and that's how he became an addict. I hear from other kids tell me the same thing. They clicked a wrong click here or there. Children by the age of 9 and 10 today are already exposed to this. Our children, 9 and 10, are exposed to the computer, exposed to these kind of things, and especially the boys. The boys who don't necessarily have the same kind of necessity for relationships, they don't understand that. They often, without even realizing it, get sucked into the computer, get attached to the computer, and then it's so hard to break them away from it. Baruch Hashem, there is help out there, but it starts at home, and it starts with restrictions. Please do not feel that you have to give your child a cell phone because everybody has one. That's like smoking, that's like alcohol. You're giving your child a gun. You're giving him a dangerous thing. Where I grew up, where I live, we live in Minnesota, and it's a place where people take their children hunting. And people have guns, and they use their guns, and they take their children out with guns. But you know what? Nobody will give their child a gun without a lock on it. Nobody will give a child a gun without a parent there. That's absolutely irresponsible. Why? Because children make mistakes, and children do things. And even though it might be 1 in 1,000 that a child might make a mistake, but that mistake will kill somebody. I am seeing the deaths every day. I am seeing the direct result of children's access to cell phones in their marriages. I've been working today, I've been doing this since 1996. I'm seeing the young men and the young women who've been struggling, and I've seen how it's affected their marriages. And I see people today who are struggling with their marriages. And it comes back very often to the fact that there's a cell phone. Do your children a favor, do yourselves a favor, and take this seriously. And understand that this is something which you do have the power, you do have the strength, you do have the ability to do something about. And like I said, the first step is put controls on the cell phone. Don't give your children phones so they can walk around with them until they're reasonably close to the age of adulthood. And then again, even then, there's nothing wrong with saying to your kids, we need the phones, put them all in one place or something like that. Your kids are getting older, they're going to move away, they're going to go to yeshiva, you're going to lose control of those kind of things. It's true. You may not have full control in those kind of things. So what? But at least you can start now when you do have some control on your children. I want to end off, and then we can ask if you have any questions. I'd be glad to talk about that. I want to end off. There's something interesting which I saw in the Maimon Torah from the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe says that there are two nisyonis which we have. We have the nisyonis of mitzvahs aseh and the nisyonis of mitzvahs lo aseh. That means we have the challenges of the positive commandments and the challenges of the negative commandments. The challenges of the mitzvahs aseh are, not everybody wants to put on tefillin. Not everybody wants to light Shabbos candles. Not everybody wants to keep kosher. The Alter Rebbe says that nisoyin is the easier nisoyin. And as we see, Baruch Hashem today, that nisoyin is pretty much conquered. People are willing to put on tefillin. People are willing to light Shabbos candles. People are willing to keep kashrus. That nisoyin we have conquered. And we will also conquer the next Nisoyan, which is mitzvahs lo yisaseh, the things which we're not supposed to do. And the Alter Rebbe says something fascinating. The Alter Rebbe says that mitzvahs aseh, the Nisoyan of mitzvahs aseh, is megala elakus ba'olam. When we put on tefillin, when we light Shabbos candles, we show that there is HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world. He said, but the Nisoyan of mitzvahs lo yisaseh is a different one. That is not there to show that there's an Eibush in the world, but that is to show that the world has no mitzias. When you don't eat something which you have a desire for, when you don't do something which you have a desire for, you're showing that that thing has no power. And so, the shlichus of bringing the Eibush to the world, that we've already achieved. Now our job is to show that the world doesn't have any power over us either. This is the last Nisoyan which we have. And this is the Nisoyan which we have to continue to fight. I'm going to open up the floor if people have any questions. Gladly take questions. Anybody got any questions? Any thoughts? Anybody have any courage to ask anything? Boy, your sons have a lot more courage than you do. I just want to make a couple of extra points if you don't want to take the time for questions. Yes? You can say it in Hebrew, and I'll translate. הוא אומר שהוא לא מעוניין בשום דבר?
כן, אחרת כאילו, אני לא יודעת אם רק בגלל הטלפון, אבל בגלל שכבר יש הטכנולוגיה, אז הוא לא מוצא עניין בדברים של החיים.
So the question was, what do you do when a child already has a cell phone and you take it away from him and he says, you take it away from me, I'm not interested in anything already anyway, and now it's so hard to take away the cell phone. Well, first of all, it's a good question, but you understand that you just identified why we shouldn't be giving the children cell phones. And it's not only because of destructive things on the phone, it's just because the power of the cell phone itself takes away the interest in anything else. There is nothing else which can be as interesting and as exciting as a cell phone. That's a fact of life. Well, the answer is that's exactly why you need to take away the cell phone. For that reason itself. Because if you take away the cell phone from that child for 2 weeks, he'll cry and bang his head. First of all, the easiest thing to say is, I'm not taking away the cell phone from you, the school is taking away the cell phone from you. The school says you're not allowed to have one, so I can't give you one. What happens is, it's true, you have to give him a reward. Give him $100. How much is the cell phone worth? It costs you $700. Tell him, I'll give you $700. There's a Litvish yeshiva in Minneapolis. The Rosh Yeshiva over there pays each boy the equivalent of what his phone costs him, so he should give up his cell phone. He pays him $700. This is a fellow, the man's name is Shlomo Kutov. He happens to be one of my students. I used to teach in the Lubavitcher school. He's now married and he's a Rosh Yeshiva. He comes from a very wealthy family, and he's a Rosh Yeshiva. And what he does is these boys come to his yeshiva with cell phones, and he makes a deal with them. I will pay you for you to give up the cell phone. Of course, that's not all he does. He takes they give up the cell phone, takes them on trips, they do other things, and he takes the phone away from them. It's not easy. You can't just take away the cell phone. Sometimes you need the help of a professional. Of course, if the child is 8 or 9, you don't need a professional necessarily. If it's an older bacher, you're going to have to figure out a way. One of the problems is with our kids who may have that problem is for some reason they may have some kind of learning disability. They may have got caught up in the cell phone because they have ADHD. Kids who have ADHD, who have distractibility problems, who have learning difficulties, not interested in Gemara. It's hard for them to sit and learn, and they don't get a reward for learning. but they get the reward from the phone. The phone always says, good job. So what we need to do is need to have a conversation with the teacher, maybe set on one-on-one learning with that kid for a while until they become stronger, so that it's true they don't have their cell phone, but they're getting extra support. Maybe there's a reward which you bring into the mix. These are individualized interventions which we can do, which can be done for a child like that, to break him away from the cell phone. It is true. You cannot take away a cell phone from a child and not put something else rewarding in its place. But be careful. $700 every week so the kid should not have the phone is an expensive thing. And we need to use our brains how we do this. But it's true. You definitely need to find something else for a child. It's a good point, by the way. I believe that our children do need some kind of activity which is not necessarily a cell phone, which might take the place for it. Somebody else had a question over here.
The boys lately are into a game, Fortnite. They're all playing it on their cell phones, morning to midnight. And they claim there's nothing else to do.
Yeah. You don't know what to do.
That's a good question. The boys are on the phone, and they're playing a game or on the computer called Fortnite, and they say there's nothing else to do. And it's true, I think we need to look at this a little bit differently. I don't want to speak for the Anhola over here, but first of all, yeshiva bachers in yeshiva most of the time. Maybe when they come home, they need to be on their bike. The problem is, look at it this way. This is one of the reasons why we need to get them on the phone, off the phone. How can you tell a kid, well, get off your phone, there's lots to do. You can play a board game. You can go on your bike and ride around the block. Which kid is going to enjoy riding around the block when the option is a cell phone? This is exactly the reason why we need to take away the cell phones from the kids, because we can't compete with the cell phones. If you can't take away the cell phone, let them play Fortnite on the computer at home. Let them have it and tell them you can play it for 1 hour, or you can play it for a half hour, or for whatever it is. Put a time frame on it, and just don't stand there and say, you've got to get off it. There's no way you'll win that battle. Get that control software, and the computer just turns off. And they have to go away because they have no access anymore. This is exactly why, yes, you have a problem, and we need to figure that out. But this is what I think the Anhola B'Yeshiva is trying to do, is trying to say, we're not going to win this battle if it's going to be about struggling. Are we going to teach them Hasidus? Or are we going to have to compete with a cell phone? There's no winning here. We can't win that battle. This is what we have to be able to figure out how to do it differently. And it does begin with having to restrict the cell phone from them.
I have a friend who's a teacher who tells the students that to keep the cell phones in class, the first to have the phone.
Do I have to repeat that? Okay, I tell you what, I think it's a good idea to open this up for individual conversation. I'm going to be standing here until 10 o'clock. If anybody has individual questions, I'd gladly answer them. Thank you very much, and I hope that the message has gotten